Hi, I'm Justin Black. Welcome to the second episode of The Visionary Wilderness, which is a series of videos on learning to see, specifically with regard to understanding the difference between the way the camera sees and the way the human visual system sees, and how understanding that difference can improve our photography. Today I want to talk about aspects of photographic seeing, and I'll start off with the obvious place to start, which is looking. So one of my mentors, Galen Rowell, tells a story in a book he wrote called Many People Come Looking, about an encounter with a Tibetan monk who said, many people come looking, not good. Some people come and see, good. And I think that sort of says it all. There's a big difference between looking and seeing. It results from having our interest piqued, having our attention drawn to something. It's a reaction basically to something new or something we haven't seen before. And the act of looking, directing our gaze at something, then presumably results in an emotional response, and that could be wonder, awe, fear, whatever. And then that response triggers our interest in looking more deeply into a subject and beginning to see it and understand why it is we want to photograph it, how we want to photograph it, things like that. For instance, in the sequence of pictures of elephants in Tanzania, this first image is basically the reaction to coming upon this herd of elephants, and it's not particularly well composed. It's just a matter of, oh, look, there's a group of elephants, let's point the camera at it. There's some nice acacia trees there, but it's really just a snapshot. And then that begins the process of starting to work the subject and really starting to see what's there and how it can be made into a photograph. So we get in a little bit closer and then realize that since elephants are what I call mature subjects, in other words, we're familiar with them, it doesn't take much to identify an elephant. We can look at tight detail of the skin of the elephant, the tusk, whatever, the eye, and know it's an elephant. So elephants are the sort of subjects that you can really sort of carve into them visually. So I turn the camera vertically, go in even tighter to show, focus on the calf and show more of the relationship between the mother and the calf with other members of the herd in the background for context. And in the case of this snapshot of a lion carrying a young wildebeest, this is just my first shot reacting to the situation. Oh, here comes this lion, grab the camera, point and shoot. One of my clients' lenses is in the frame. This is just initial reaction. This is looking, right? This is, oh look, there's the lion. The next picture is after I've started to see the lion and began to actually work with it, understand the situation, compose, look for timing, look for the decisive moment, relationship between the lion and the lioness in the background. So looking and the emotional response that it generates leads to our interest in further investigation and interrogation of the subject matter. Seeing, on the other hand, is really all about awareness, right? It's about building awareness of your subject and the situation, and that really empowers you as an artist. It allows you to really decide what you're going to do in terms of making images. It's the opportunity to tune in, to achieve deeper realization of what you're looking at, and gives you the opportunity to grasp the significance of the subject matter, the story it's telling, its relationship to its surroundings and the broader world, its relationship to human culture and to you, the photographer. And through seeing, you begin to understand the creative potential of the situation and recognize possibilities to optimize the composition. Seeing also allows you to tune into what the light is doing and therefore predict what it's going to do. In these two pictures from White Sands National Monument, one is early sort of twilight, the twilight wedges coming down pre-sunrise, and decided what I really wanted was that moment just before the pink band touched the mountains in the background, and I wanted to go in a little bit tighter and simplify the composition. And then, of course, choosing your perspective and how that affects relationships in the scene. This is an iceberg in Antarctica, first from a little farther away, which tends to give the tower in the background a little more prominence relative to the iceberg in the foreground. But getting in close makes the shapes of the foreground iceberg much more prominent and pronounced, and diminishes the importance of that tower in the background. So those are choices you make based on seeing. Then we want to establish a sense of depth, perhaps, create an illusion of three-dimensionality in this two-dimensional medium that we're working with. Here's a picture from Greenland. It's a classic near-far picture with a wide-angle lens that allows us to both look down at the foreground subject and out into the distance. And that effect almost always would create a very convincing sense of three-dimensionality and depth to a picture. Similar case in this picture from Iceland, this waterfall where you're looking down into the waterfall as well as out and across it and into the background. Or you can put on a longer lens and compress that space, as with these cottonwood trees in Utah, with a short telephoto, not a really long one, but that compression stacks things up and it reduces a sense of three-dimensionality and it enhances a sense of two-dimensionality. And then with framing, we tune into how elements in the landscape are framed by the landscape or can be framed by the landscape. And here vantage point is key, identifying the spot where this little pine tree is framed against the reflection in the lake. That was critical to this picture in the Wind River Range in Wyoming. Or this picture from Calf Creek Falls in Utah, where I got in underneath this mountain ash branch to frame the lower fall in the background. Deciding where you're going to put your focal plane is really important. It's obviously we tend to focus on the primary subject, but especially in landscape photography, sometimes you're splitting the difference to make the most of depth of field. You're using hyperfocal focus, which is maximizing your depth of field from the foreground to the background. And there you may not place your focal plane directly on the main subject. You may focus a little bit in front or a little bit behind to shift that zone of depth of field where you want it, which is what I was doing here in this meadow in West Virginia in a freezing morning frost with little water droplets coating this spider web. And timing, is critical too. And as we look out at the landscape or look at the situation, watching how things are moving, assuming it's a dynamic situation. In this case, this is at a place called Mesa del Mar in Tenerife, with the Teide volcano in the background. And I was watching these wind-blown waves come in, and the side lighting. As they threw up this spray was being illuminated, and I really wanted to try to get 3 waves all at once, and that was hard to get. You just have to sort of watch it and time it and shoot a lot of frames, and eventually you get one. Or this shot on Salisbury Plain in South Georgia Island of king penguins going out to sea en masse. It's wonderful to have this big rush of penguins moving through all at once. But the critical thing, the really decisive moment aspect of this picture, is the one penguin sort of in the middle in the back, looking up with his beak in the air. That's the one sort of key point that breaks the pattern, that calls your attention and creates sort of a primary focal point. And that's a matter of timing. An observation. Or this picture of sort of a natural bonsai pine tree in Zion National Park. The juxtaposition of the silhouette and the cloud behind, and the highlighting of the silhouette using the illuminated cloud behind it to accentuate the shape is really critical. And that's a matter of, in this case, seeing the cloud coming and hoping that I could line the two up as it drifted into position. But this picture doesn't work a few seconds earlier or a few seconds later. It's a critical moment. Another aspect of photographic seeing is the process of identifying problematic or distracting elements in the scene. In this iceberg in Antarctica, there were these wonderful raking sort of shafts of light along the flanks of the iceberg. But there were highlights in the background that were a little bit distracting, and really I wanted to focus on that main central shape. So I just shifted the camera position a little bit to the right, basically to hide the highlights behind the ice and simplify the composition and just work with that primary central shape. It's important to remember that chaotic, distracting content is never going to do your picture any good. So you want to use that opportunity to look at options for camera position or using light or other aspects of the landscape to maybe hide or diminish distracting content. And that brings us to visualization, which is really just the process of imagining how the finished photo is going to look relative to what you see in nature. And that's really where seeing, emotion, intellect, imagination, and technique all sort of merge. That's where you put the equation that's going to result in that finished photograph all together. And each one of those components is really important. Visualization can apply to any picture you want to make, and you don't even have to have seen the picture. You can just imagine the scenario and sort of work through it in your mind. But there are certain cases, I find that visualization is most important in cases where you're not documenting a scene in a way that is really similar to the way that we would see it. So that takes into account cases like black and white photography, which is a departure from the way we see long exposure photography, where you're recording a long period of time in a single frame, multiple exposures, and also situations where the image content is changing so quickly you never really see it until you see the final photograph. So in that case, you sort of have to imagine the way the photograph is going to look, and even when you're looking through the camera, you never really quite see it until you actually look at the frame after shooting. And another situation that's similar to that is flash photography, often where the flash is such a key light source that you're not seeing the scene under the flash illumination until you actually get the picture back. And here are a few examples. Here's a picture made in moonlight. It's a long exposure, about 3 or 4 minutes, in Torres del Paine National Park, with the clouds blowing through over the mountains, some star trails and that sort of thing. And it's a very high dynamic range scene. I mean, it's very contrasting. There's very bright brights in the moon, very dark shadows, and this is one of those situations where you have to know your camera and know that the camera can actually pull this out, because it's quite remarkable. The black and white version that I processed, this is what I visualized. When you understand what your camera is capable of and what you're going to be able to do in processing after the fact, then you can really make judgments about composition and how you're going to tackle the situation. Here's another long exposure in Iceland, blocks of ice, glacial ice, icebergs basically that are breaking up, that have flowed out of the Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon and then become stranded on Breytamerkurstander Beach. And the interesting thing about this situation is it was under very bright sunny conditions, and in that kind of situation you get all these specular highlights on the water that are generally really unpleasant and don't tend to help you out much in this kind of situation. But running the long exposure has the effect of allowing those highlights to sort of dance and move around on the water, which diminishes the brightness value of those specular highlights at any given moment over the course of the long exposure. So again, that's a case of visualization, understanding that that's going to happen. And so it takes a situation that you may have walked by and said, oh, that'll never work, and makes you realize that actually, in fact, you can pull a great photograph out of it. With multiple exposures, You've got to be able to sort of understand in your mind's eye what the final image is going to look like, or some idea of what it's going to look like. Here on the Oregon coast, I wanted to catch water washing over these rocks sort of throughout the picture, but it wasn't happening at any one time. So what I did was I set up an in-camera multiple exposure. This is a Nikon, so I think I was able to set, I think I did 8 frames or something like that, and then each time a wave washed over a rock and ran down, I'd shoot a frame and then wait until wave washed over another section of the composition, shoot a frame. And this is all done in camera, no layering or anything like that in Photoshop. But if you sort of look at the scene and imagine what's possible using the tools at your disposal, this is the kind of thing you can do. Another situation, normally I wouldn't bother shooting at all. This was on a ship between the Falkland Islands and South Georgia Island, looking into the reflection of the bright sun off the water. And I mean, it was really bright. So it was so bright it was hard to look at. But I thought to myself, well, if I put on a strong neutral density filter and force a long exposure, that reflection on the water is really made up of a whole bunch of little point light sources, point specular highlights. And over the course of a long exposure, those points would draw sort of very hard lines into the image and give it definition, even though it's extremely blurred. And I think this is a half second or a full second exposure, handheld from the ship, from the rocking ship. This picture of a dusky dolphin in New Zealand, I got the idea because the surface of the water was so smooth, had these lovely patterns on it, just sort of undulating, smooth surface, but constantly changing, and the dolphins were swimming all around us. And I threw on a polarizing filter to cut the glare off the surface of the water to create these little windows in the sort of the shaded aspect of the waves, and allow me to see down underneath the water really well. But I couldn't really see. This was all changing constantly. The pattern on the surface of the water and the position of the dolphin and everything. So this is one of those images where you have to sort of imagine it in your head, wait for the right moment. You never quite see it, when it happens, and then you look through your images after the fact, and you end up with a few that are keepers. And as I mentioned with flash, this is a case where I'm in a forest. There are trees around. There's other vegetation in the background, and it's just murky light, and set up with a 200 millimeter macro lens, and there's just this very subtle breeze that was shaking the flower. So I just was not going to be able to get a shutter speed fast enough to stop it. So out came the flash. I used the Rogue flash bender to wrap the reflector around the flower. So I had primary flashlight coming in from the front and the reflector wrapping around behind, bouncing light into the flower. And these wonderful little orchids, out there in the forest. Behind this thing, there's lots of vegetation, trees, and all that sort of thing. But I was able to basically crank up the aperture and the shutter speed high enough that the ambient exposure forced the background to black and just simplified the background problem for me. The next phase of seeing I want to talk about is bearing witness, which is more about sort of raising awareness. Sometimes we recognize in a subject that it really needs to be given its own voice through us as photographers. So that could be, a species or an ecosystem that's threatened. It could be a person who we just feel deserves, some attention or having their story told. It could be anything that where we want to give voice to the subject matter, basically. And the interesting thing about taking that perspective and that approach is that it informs and shifts our vision of how we look at that subject and how we want to depict it. So it does change how we see, really, our vision of the subject. So here's Ursus maritimus, so the polar bear, a species that's definitely in need of a voice, and an ecosystem that's definitely in need of a voice. Here's this big male polar bear. He looks fat and happy, healthy, in a beautiful white frozen landscape. This picture takes us eye to eye, on eye level with polar bear. This is actually shot on foot. There's nothing between me and this fellow. It was an incredible experience, and it tells us something about the power and sort of the nobility of these incredible animals. You know, if we go on to the next one, you know, here we have a polar bear in the sea ice north of Svalbard, about 500 miles from the North Pole. And you know, here it is at the ice edge, you know, pondering where to go next. The next one is a mother and cub, you know, searching the ice for seals. And you know, thinking about what's going on in the Arctic with the diminishing sea ice, which the polar bears depend upon for hunting seals, you know, it makes me think about how to tell the story about where these animals live and that sort of thing. And you know, it made me take this last picture of polar bear picture, which shows the expanse of this icy oceanic landscape that these bears are living on and hunting on. And so how expansive this area is that they search for food, and how, you know, this only works when the ice is actually there. This ice melts and these polar bears are either stranded at sea, or they maybe make it to an island or something like that where their chances of hunting are much lower. But anyway, it's, you know, starting to think about telling a story that has to do with the survival and sustainability of this population changes the way you look at it and the way you make pictures. Here onshore in Svalbard and Spitsbergen, we're at a glacier that's, you know, rapidly collapsing. Here on the fringe of the glacier, there are blocks of ice that have basically been isolated, stranded as the glacier retreats, and I think it tells a story quite clearly about how fast this melting is happening, how fast these glaciers are retreating. So, you know, if I just wanted to go out there and make a pretty picture of a glacier, it's easy to do. You just avoid this kind of stuff that's a little bit maybe not as pretty, but tells us more about what's really going on. And finally, we have this picture from Torres del Paine National Park of these tree skeletons, these lenge tree skeletons that are they're large swaths of the park that were affected by a fire several years ago. So lots of these tree skeletons remain. They've had a major reforestation program going on, planting new trees, and that's going well. But you know, I think that pictures like this are a good reminder of what can happen and what does happen also as a result of climate change, as the sort of the moisture and precipitation patterns change and things get a little drier. It can have a major impact on the landscape. Another phase of photographic seeing is reflection, which I think is really important. And that's basically about taking a step back from that immediate interaction with your subject matter to give some thought to your own experience and the interaction, and consideration of how the experience of that situation, you know, your subject, your location, the moment, has shaped your worldview, your creative notions and goals, your direction as an artist, your inspiration, you know, and also how you've shaped your subject through your engagement and depiction of it. So the way that you depict a subject is going to influence how other people view that subject, and also how you think about it. And of course, all of this stems from what I call seeking, which is really sort of searching for purpose and voice, or in other words, you know, what is it you want to photograph and why, and what are you doing with the pictures? You know, I assume that you have some sort of idea of what you want to explore through photographs, and also why you want to treat these subjects through photography as opposed to through other media, because you could draw, you could paint, you could write, you could shoot video, and maybe you know, you'll do some of all of those things or some of those things, and combining them will allow you to communicate with more depth and effectiveness. But where do your passions lead you? What do you wish to communicate through photographs? Are you telling a story about the subject? Are you exploring aesthetic or conceptual possibilities? Are you sharing a personal experience or perspective of the world or the subject matter? And once you identify, a set of photographic interests or subjects that you want to approach and photograph, it's a good idea to sort of come up with a priority list to focus your efforts, particularly if you tend to be interested in lots of different kinds of photography. It's easy to bounce around and not really focus on a particular avenue, which I think is very important. Then, once you're ready to go, do a little research on your subject matter, on your locations, that sort of thing, so that you are ready to roll, and you can begin planning, where and when you need to be on location to shoot. So thank you for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, to subscribe to our channel if you want to see future videos, and to make sure your notifications are turned on so that you are made aware once the next video is posted. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to seeing you again.